Thank you, Speaker. On behalf of the Greens, I rise to address the Casino Legislation Amendment Bill 2022. For too long, massive corporations like Crown and the Star have been allowed to play by a different set of rules in Sydney. This government must show that they are willing and able to be able to hold corporations to account, and this bill is definitely a good start to doing that. However, the Bergen report found that Crown was unfit to hold a casino licence, pointing to links to money laundering and poor governance. The Royal Commissioner has described the types of things going on in these casinos as disgraceful, illegal, dishonest, unethical and exploitative. No casino in Australia has yet been stripped of their licence, and I foreshadow that tonight the Greens will move an amendment to make sure that that no longer holds. We will move an amendment to revoke Crown Casino's registered gaming licence, because really what we are doing here is seeking to provide oversight over a body, and while we support this bill, it's necessary to realise that you shouldn't get a second chance. That the level of findings of the Bergen report that found that the actions of the Crown, that they were unfit to hold a casino licence, that they were disgraceful, illegal, dishonest, unethical and exploitative, is surely the most damning evidence that we need in this place to revoke a licence. Anything less than that demonstrates what I think we clearly know, and as we heard from the member for Sydney, there is a history too. But it isn't just Crown as a corporation that is to blame for this mess. Back in 2013, the government and New South Wales Labor rushed through legislation to abandon Sydney's one casino policy and roll out the red carpet for Crown. At the time, my Greens colleague, member for Balmain, Jamie Parker, was one of only 3 MPs to vote against the new licence legislation, which passed with the combined votes of the Liberals, Nationals and New South Wales Labor. I acknowledge the member for Sydney was here advocating against this horrific rushing through of legislation. The Greens at this stage were the only political party in this chamber to oppose the bill. New South Wales Labor lined up with the Liberals and the Nationals to ram it through. At the time in his speech, Jamie Parker warned in this place, the member for Balmain, that issuing a second Sydney casino licence would open the door to corruption, money laundering and criminality. Lo and behold, what have we seen? It's like he had a premonition, except he didn't have a premonition because all the evidence was already clear that this was what was going to happen. Regardless, Crown was exempted from existing planning rules, handed prime public waterfront land and granted a casino licence outside the normal tender process. This is a disgrace. And so this mess that this legislation attempts to be fixing up right now is of the government's own making, backed in by the New South Wales Liberal opposition, who gave Crown full bipartisan support. But it should come as no surprise that the Greens have uncovered that donation records show that Crown has donated over $87,000 to both the Liberal Nationals and the Labor every year for the last 20 years. What are we saying? Crown have donated over $87,000 to both the Liberals and Nationals and Labor every year for the last 20 years. Political donations by corporations like Crown, strong access, strong support across the parliament, and help make sure that they are allowed to play by a different set of rules than the rest of us. That is why the Greens don't take dirty donations from Crown. That's why we don't take dirty donations from corporations. And it's why we are seeing the government and the opposition join forces today to rush through this next piece of legislation rather than dealing with the actual problem, which is that we should be revoking Crown Casino's licence. But instead, what do? They rush through these reforms, and let's talk for a little bit about why they might be rushing through this bill that was only seen a little while ago. Because as I say, while we do support the reforms in this bill, it is important to note that the rushing through of this is very concerning. As we know, and it is our suspicion that this motion, this intent of rushing it through today on a suspension of standing orders has more to do with the Independent Liquor and Gaming's independent review into Star Casino, which will hand down its report in late August. We know that there will be gambling harm recommendations to come at the conclusion of the Star Review, which is expected in weeks. The Greens are concerned that pushing this legislation through today will mean that the government can avoid having to legislate some of the gambling harm minimisation recommendations that are likely to be contained in that report. And it is critical, and I would ask the Minister to address this in his reply, to give commitments to ensure that legislating gambling harm minimisation measures is on the government's agenda. And I foreshadow that the Greens gambling spokesperson Kate Fairman in the other place will be moving amendments to seek to improve the gambling harm measures in this bill. The final Bergen report, dated 1 February 2021, made 19 recommendations for regulatory reform, primarily aimed at addressing risks of money laundering in casinos, as well as improving casino operators' compliance with regulatory requirements and improving the process for considering and improving the probity of individuals and companies associated with casinos. The New South Wales Government has accepted all of the 19 recommendations, and this bill gives effect to all 19, which the Greens support. But unfortunately, the Bergen report did not expand in its terms of reference to include consideration of the harm caused by gambling in its terms of reference. The government is keen to divide these two issues up, with illegal financial crimes and money laundering on one hand and the social crimes big casinos commit on the other. We cannot separate the fact that casinos cause gambling harm to our societies and just look at this as a regulatory issue. The Independent Liquor and Gaming inquiry into the Star Casino Review is expected to provide recommendations around gambling harm. And of course, unlike Crown Casino and the Star Casino contains a large number of poker machines. But we cannot let this be a distraction to the harm caused by gambling. So, because there are obviously additional considerations when poker machines are present. But just because there are no poker machines does not mean that there is not gambling harm. And just because there are no poker machines now doesn't mean there won't be poker machines in the future. As someone who grew up in Adelaide and knows the Adelaide casino very well, I can say that there is a very slippery slope that goes from an idea of a casino that just has certain types of tables and gambling into a very slippery slope where you see rows and rows and rows of poker machines sucking up people's money, causing people real harm, all in the interests of corporate profits. We know that there will be gambling harm recommendations to come, and it is critical that these are included. It is also absolutely critical that we recognise that as the Greens are concerned and are pushing for, that the government needs to make sure that they legislate some of the gambling harm minimisation recommendations contained in that report, but also recognises the harm that is being caused by not revoking Crown Casino's licence. It is critical that the government listens. This is a view shared by key stakeholders, including Wesley Mission, and I want to acknowledge their work and the work of the Alliance for Gambling Reform in this area over many years. Wesley Mission strongly believes that the bill could contain much stronger gambling harm reduction elements, including requiring responsible conduct of gambling training to be developed and delivered by the casino regulator rather than the casinos themselves. Tim Costello from the Alliance for Gambling Reform yesterday stated clearly that Crown can't be trusted to do this right and that their business model has not changed. The Greens absolutely echo these concerns. To the Greens amendments, as I foreshadowed, my Greens colleague in the other place, Kate Fairman, will be moving a number of amendments to improve the gambling harm measures in this bill. And in this chamber, I will be seeking on behalf of the Greens to take the step that is really needed. A step to act on the Bergen report that found Crown was unfit to hold a licence. And as such, we will move an amendment to seek to revoke Crown Casino's licence in this state. Thank you. I rise to offer the Green support for the amendments moved by the member for Sydney, and want to acknowledge the work and the collaborative effort that Wesley and their advice has been doing in relation to working with both the member for Sydney and the Greens and the opposition and the government in relation to providing the necessary advice and guidance, and I think trying to incorporate any gambling harm minimisation considerations into and advice into this legislation is absolutely critical. And while I have a great amount of respect for the member for Sydney, I just want to acknowledge the fact that I think it's really important that we stop making these judgment calls around the idea of amendments being sensible or not sensible, because I think the implication there is an idea that some of the amendments that are being moved are not being done in a way that is appropriate. And I think it's really important to recognise that what is not sensible about what we're doing here is allowing a casino that has clearly showed that they are unfit to hold a licence to continue to operate. There's nothing sensible about that. So while we can all agree that there is broad agreement across the chamber on the fact that we need to have these reforms in place, there's broad agreement on the implementation of those 19 recommendations from the Bergen report. I think that it is very unsensible for us to be allowing Crown to continue to operate in this state. And so while it is absolutely essential that we need to include as strong as what we can amendments into this legislation, I commend the member for Sydney for doing that, the idea that we're highlighting the sensible nature of some reforms over others really does beg the question, how sensible is it to allow Crown Casino to continue to operate in this state, given the findings of the Bergen report?